Hey everybody, in today's episode we have an awesome interview for you with Andi Rozier from Vertical Worship. Andi and Matt sit down and talk about what it was like to lead worship the last 18 months with the COVID-19 pandemic and how we can move forward as worship leaders and take the challenges we faced and what we learned to better serve the Lord and better serve our church. Hope you enjoy it.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com and your host for the Loop Live show. Today we have an awesome guest, my friend Andi Rozier. Andy's with Vertical Worship. He's a worship pastor at Harvest Bible Chapel here in Chicago. He and I actually worked together at Harvest Bible Chapel for many years. I think I was there for 8 years or so. And being underneath Andy's leadership, I learned so much about leading worship, about building set lists, about writing songs, about just leading worship, like actually what to do when you're on stage, and not just like playing through songs, but really like how do you actually lead and pastor in that moment. I've learned so much from sitting in meetings with Andy, from watching him lead worship for many years, from these conversations. And so I'm really excited to have Andy as a guest on the show. We're going to be talking about the challenges that many of us have faced of leading worship during COVID and after COVID and all of that in between. So I have a lot of really interesting questions for Andy. I can't wait to hear what he has to say. So without further ado, here is Andi Rozier. Hey, Andy.
How's it going?
Hey, man. So good to see you.
Your words are very kind, but let the people know that I also got to witness the birth of the Loop community happen on stage with a whole bunch of gear and the Looptimus version 1. And man, it was amazing to watch, to be a witness to the birth of that and the favor that the Lord has clearly put upon you and the ministry that you are serving people all around the world with now.
Oh, man. Thanks. It is pretty crazy to think about that. You really did witness Loop community being birthed. Like, you saw the little plastic Looptimus controller prototypes, and when we used to have tons of like track gear on stage down below you, it's like, and it's so much simpler now.
Yeah, right in front of you at the mic stand. And
it was overkill.
Yeah, just to think, wow, you know, how far it's come, and you've worked really hard at it. Well done.
Well, I am really excited to actually talk to you again, just because first of all, it's been a long time since we've talked. We both have gray in our beards now.
Yes, we do.
And I really did learn a lot from you. When I think back to like those years when I was at Harvest, I learned so much. And a lot of things that I still apply every time I lead worship still. And so I'm always excited to talk to you about worship leading things, because you always have these just nuggets, gold nuggets of wisdom to share. And I've seen you teach so many different worship workshops, you know, with Vertical and at Harvest. And so I'm really excited about this, because I think that this has been a very interesting and unique time for worship leaders and churches. I am not on staff at a church right now, so I can't even imagine I don't think I've even fully grasped how challenging it probably has been for churches to navigate this season. And so I would be curious just to hear from you, what was it like for you and your church when COVID first hit and everything went online? People had to shift their thinking entirely, how they build set lists, all sorts of things. Like, what kind of challenges did that bring about for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of the same challenges that probably everybody experienced. It all happened really fast. We actually released a record the Friday of the week before Chicago got shut down. And then we were on stage on a Thursday night, the following Thursday night, March 13th, I think it was. And I still have my guitar around my neck. We'd finished rehearsing for the release concert, and my boss walks in and says, hey, the governor just said that we can't do anything, like over 100 people were shut down. And so we had to get the word out as fast as possible to, like, there were people driving up from Texas.
Oh,
Dude, it was crazy, you know, and
like the
we
worst timing.
hung out a little bit and greeted people. But, and then, you know, I remember coming back into the office and just sitting around with a few guys and just, I mean, the word was pivot, right? And there was pivot, unprecedented. There was all these words that were like flying around, right? And I think just like everybody, we had to just kind of like figure out what can we do, and then the second question was how do we do it, and so I think for everybody it just required a lot of kind of like thinking of how do we reach people in their homes and how do we do it, and is that just going to be kind of like going live on Facebook? But whatever it is, we have to do something. We are the church. We want to serve our people. We want them to know that we're there. And I think probably the gravest mistake that we could have made was like, you know, how do we continue to put on the show, you know, of the service? But instead, the top priority was just kind of like, how do we care for all these people who are being pulled out of work and being pulled out of whatever occupations that they have? That became the top of the list. And then let's address kind of how do we play a couple of songs into a camera and just get it across the finish line at the weekend. And then after that, it started to grow. I mean, every 7 days a weekend service comes around. So we had six and a half days in between every weekend.
Yeah.
To figure out, okay, how do we do this better? And I would say that, like, what was fascinating to me, and probably to a lot of people my age, maybe, is that, you know, I've been in worship ministry for over 25 years. I've always, you know, you would see this too, right? That we've just seen kind of like different expressions of churches doing different things and advancing the field in different ways. And it was the first time ever in my career or my lifetime I'd ever seen the whole church go through one thing at the same time. It felt like it leveled the ground. And that was a really beautiful thing. And I remember being on the phone with a lot of worship leaders who were calling me, and I was like, guys, this isn't like, we're pivoting, but God is not pivoting. He saw this. He looked down the corridor of time. He knew this was coming. And he is still going to do exactly what he wants to do. It's just we have to figure out a way to continue to get the message across.
Oh my goodness. That is a profound thought. I actually had never thought about that. That it was an experience that every church was immediately doing together and and a challenge that every church was having to figure out at the same time.
In the whole world, Europe, Asia, America, like we all went in at the same time. And those first few weeks were really, what's the word I want to put around it? I went back to school a little bit, I would say, just by logging on to other people's services and watching what they were doing, and probably I watched Chris Davenport at Hillsong, New York, just kind of put a laptop on top of his, you know, it's Hillsong, New York, and he puts a laptop on top of his piano, and his kids are running around behind him, and he just plays some songs to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I was like, that might be the most beautiful expression I've seen.
Yeah.
In this, you know, so.
It kind of just got simpler in a way.
Yeah.
It got simpler right away, but then I think it started getting more and more complex as we kind of started figuring out how to like configure it and like create a broadcast that was very professional. And
right.
But those first couple of weeks were really like sweet and simple.
Very. And, you know, I'm a big, you know this about me, but I'm a big kind of advocate for like bigger is not better.
Yeah.
The win is not the wow.
Yeah.
And I I'm an advocate for those because I have flesh covering my body, and my flesh is at war with my spirit, and will always be. And so I, just like any other worship leader, find myself having walked down a road thinking this production is great and we're really representing something well, whereas the gospel can be received by a kid sitting on the corner of his bed or a guy on a street corner. And as Bob Coughlin has so wonderfully said in his manifesto, Worship Matters, like there is no creativity or production that we can put around the gospel to make it more beautiful than it is. And that was the testing ground, I think, for a lot of people of, does my thing rely on good production, or does it simply just rely on the quality of a great message?
Wow. How did COVID affect the worship team? Like, were you guys working from home?
Yeah, we all went home, and I can give you my personal story. It came at a good season for me where I was looking to, I'm 44. I'm trying to raise up 24-year-olds. So it was kind of fascinating being at home, because I've always asked myself the question, who is Andy without the weekend service? The only way to find that out is to quit for like 2 or 3 years. But now all of a sudden, we weren't doing weekend services. We were doing everything during the week. We were pre-filming it. And I went out into my backyard, and I got these 2 trees that are the furthest trees apart in my yard. I live on the back of a cul-de-sac, so I have this kind of like triangle that I live on. I've got these 2 trees, and they're 110 feet apart, and I decided I wanted to put a zip line in. And so, but I have 4 boys at home, so I wanted to ride that zip line as well. And once you start doing the math, that requires the launching point of that zip line to be about 13 feet up in the air to carry a 220-pound guy. And to cut a long story short, you can't just put a ladder up in a tree. So I ended up building a tree house for my kids. And I'm a musician. I am the last person on the planet who knows how to build a tree house. But I found some YouTube videos. Thank you, Jesus. And I ended up building this tree house. And I was out there one morning kind of just, like hitting nails into the deck. And the sun was coming up. And it was misty. And I just looked out across my yard, and I was like, this is who Andy is without the weekend. He's a dad who just builds tree houses for his boys. And I could have done that anyway, but I think for me, and I think for the whole of our team, it became an exploratory time of who are we as worshipers when we're not defined by what we do, but who we are. And is home, the home that we live in, really the prize for us? Or do we just go to church buildings to worship God? Or do we worship him by building tree houses? Or spending time around our families and learning how to be present with our kids and our spouses. And so I think for our whole team, that was a very exploratory season, while we're on Zoom calls 1 million times a day. And boy, was I excited to get back into a meeting with people where you lose a lot of the humanisms and the mannerisms of sitting across a table from someone and just conversing. So
are you fully back in now, the office?
Yeah. It's been a slow process to get back, and I think for everybody, right? We've kind of learned what does pacing yourself look like. Everybody got the reset on that as well.
Yeah.
And but yeah, we're back in the office, which is great.
I would imagine, I love that story, the treehouse story. I would imagine that a lot of worship leaders listening to this had that same kind of experience of learning to be present at home. And in a way, you were forced to be at home because you couldn't go to the office. And it made it hard to work. I know from my experience, like it also made it hard for work because I had, my toddler running around and jumping in my lap for meetings. And and it was sweet, but it also was kind of hard because I felt like sometimes the separation from work and home makes it easier because you can like go somewhere and that's work. And then you can come home and really work on just like staying present at home. But what made this hard is that work and home were like one.
That's right.
And it was really challenging because I would be in a meeting and I would feel bad that I'm not like, I hear my toddler screaming in the other room and I'm like, I feel bad that I can't go play. Or if she's like, hey, come play with tiles with me. And I'm like, I can't.
Yes.
But you feel like you should. And I feel like there was like such a hard tension there.
Yeah, it kind of made us analyze who we are in that environment. It forced us to learn how we behave with our kids and whether our kids think, well, our kids have to learn who we are in a work environment. and we have to also learn kind of, if someone's in a meeting, if I'm in a meeting here in my office and someone walks in, I'm not like, buddy, could you just go away for a second? Is it okay? And we had to, I think everybody had to learn a new language of how to react around their kids and, in that season. Yeah, it was fascinating.
What, I think that churches have learned a lot from this process. There is something about that. I think that church, it felt for me at least that like we were on this kind of like we had this machine, a conveyor belt of like how to do a service, and it came around every 7 days. And like I think churches were kind of in a system on like how to do it, and then COVID kind of came and messed all that up, and we've adapted and changed. Are there things that you think that like should churches try to go back to exactly how it was before COVID, or are there some really important lessons that we learned here that we really should adapt or keep as a forever thing moving forward with church?
Yeah, I think that to completely, you can go back to church and after COVID by walking forward into that new season instead of backing up. Let's unlearn all the things that we learned. That's the error, and what we learned at our church from just data, and data doesn't lie, is that people started to tune in from outside of state and make Harvest their home. In fact, the nature of my own small group that I was in at the time changed. We picked up a guy who's completely in another state, who's a friend of a friend. And then one of the guys in my small group went down to Tennessee, moved his family down there, and remained in the small group. And those two guys are still in the small group. So the small group is now online. And forever will be, while it remains that small group. And so I think in that was like, that's the micro, but like in a macro way, I think that like, for sure, it is a big wake-up call that like people might not physically come to church, but they want to engage in church. And it is our duty as, a city on a hill that will not be hidden, to not retreat and unlearn those things that we've learned, but instead figure out ways within our staff, within our budgets, within our capabilities to continue to be connected to those people and reach those people. And then there's some churches that, good friends of mine, who have hired online pastors, and we've kind of done that. Like if you tune into our Sunday morning service, there's a specific person who's just addressing the online community. But what they're doing every week is they're saying, hey, we would love, if you do live in the area, we would love to see you here at Harvest because, don't forsake the gathering, and watching it on a TV screen is not the gathering. That's just you peering in a window. But you can get involved in the life of your church, our church from home. You can participate in a small group, but so I think there's a bit of kind of you have to figure out what you can do post-COVID to reach those people. The one thing I will say, though, for sure, is that for worship specifically, God didn't change the prescription. The Bible is full of prescriptions, and the prescription is worship me in spirit and truth. It's not spirit and truth and whatever you put in after that. And that's our great error sometimes, is that we add things to the prescription. Just imagine you get a prescription from a doctor and you go to the pharmacist and the pharmacist starts writing things on the prescription in addition. You're just like, wait a second, what is happening there? And God didn't change the prescription. He still just wants spirit and truth worship. And the worship that God prescribed is basically the only worship that God will hear. That's what he's doing. That's what he's saying to the woman at the well in John 4. He's saying, this is the worship that I'll accept. And so however we learn, whatever we've learned, and however we move forward post-COVID, God is not like, well, now that, you have an online community, let's change a little bit of this up. He's like, no, the worship that I accept is spirit and truth worship. That's it. So give that to the people, give them an opportunity to worship me in spirit and truth. And everything else that you do around that is I support it. I'll put my favor in it. But the goal is to uphold spirit and truth worship, and that's the worship that I want.
Yeah, that's so good. And being able to do that in an online, that can translate into an online service or in-person service.
Yeah, for sure.
And as we're, as a lot of churches are going back, we're hearing that attendance is lower. And how would you say, how do worship pastors or pastors even keep from getting discouraged, and how do they still lead well to a half-empty room?
Sure. Okay, I have a thought about that. So, years and years ago, we used to have a bookstore here at Harvest. It made no money whatsoever, but it was great to go in there, and they had new CDs, and new books, and then we hired a guy who his name's David Jones, and he helped translate the ESV, and one of David's jobs was to go into the bookstore and just kind of weed out all of the books that we wouldn't recommend, say. And he spent months in there. I remember we were officing over there at the time, and I'd walk past. He was always sitting on the floor, just reading through books, And one day, in my kind of sarcastic British way, I stuck my head in because the shelves were just getting empty and empty, And I stuck my head in, and I was like, wow, way to go, Dave. Just kind of totally tanked the bookstore. Just me being plastic. And he looks up at me, and in all seriousness, and it was great. I'll never forget this. He looked at me and he was like, Andy, it's not the books that are not here. It's the books that are here that matter. Mm-hmm. And I think that
wow.
Whether people are sitting at home, they're still present, they're still seen, they're engaging with your community, or whether they are sitting in the seats, it is sometimes in our natural eye an error to look at the empty seats and see loss instead of looking at the people who get up in the morning and of no compulsion decide to make your church their home, and they come and they stand in the congregations, and some of them sing because they are willing, and some people don't sing because your church is a spiritual hospital for them and they're too hurt to even lift up a song to the Lord, but they do come. And I think changing our vision from our natural eye to our spiritual eye of seeing that we lead people to worship in a spiritual hospital, and just loving the people who have chosen to come or to tune in online is the most loving thing that we can do for them, and is a complete 100% way of acting in the fullness of our giftedness.
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. That's a really good reminder. I think for my wife and I, watching church online was really fun at the beginning.
Yeah.
It was actually kind of nice because we were like, we don't have to check our kid into childcare, and like, well, at that time we were in the lobby most of the time with a crying baby.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, now we get to at least be in our living room drinking a cup of coffee. No one's, we're not disturbing anybody with our crying baby.
Yeah.
But after a while, it started to get old and just started feeling really disconnected. I had the same kind of story in that my small group also went completely virtual, and we had one guy in Arizona, one guy in Florida, and it was like totally disconnected. And I'll say that it has been really hard for us to get back into church, into going, because it was easier just to watch at home. And you said something interesting too that I think a lot of people have realized, is that you don't have to go to your local church anymore. You could just watch Hillsong in Australia, or hey, next week we're going to go to Elevation, and then next week we're going to go to Passion, and like people are just tuning into churches all over the place. It's almost like very consumer kind of driven. Yeah. And I'm curious, just from a worship pastor perspective, someone who's like serving a local church, like what would you say to someone like me who maybe has been having a harder time going back to in-person gathering? Because I think that this thing really has disconnected people so much. Yeah. COVID has.
Yeah. We've gone back to one service, and my favorite part about, I serve here out in Elgin most of the time, and we're still at one service, and the room's getting pretty full, and I'm kind of a little anxious about going to two services, because my favorite part of the Sunday morning, this is going to sound crazy, but my favorite part is right as the service ends. People just hang out for like an hour.
They miss it.
Yeah. And when we have multiple services, everybody who comes to the first service has in the back of their mind that another service is starting, and fast as they can, they're back to their cars. And that's always been a big thing for me. It's always been a big kind of like, isn't it crazy how like the scripture says, do not forsake the gathering, and yet people show up, they stand shoulder to shoulder, side by side, singing songs to a screen, and then retreating to their cars, because there's a ham in the oven that needs to get out. And I'm like, at what point did we fellowship together like this morning? And I think the part that I would encourage someone to come back to is the fact that our churches are not big events. They're rehearsals for the big event. And the big event is a table with a banquet where you will sit next to your wife, Lord willing. I'm hoping to sit next to mine. And around the table with my friends who also love Jesus, and we're going to spend eternity with each other. And I want to rehearse my soul for that. and it's a lot less about hearing the announcements, or I can sing songs of praise in my car if I want to. But the gathering is a sacrifice. It's going to cost you some time. It's going to cost you some effort. Hebrews 13:15, let's continually offer up a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips to acknowledge his name. So the Lord already knows that singing to God and participating in worship is going to cost you something. Mm-hmm. And it might cost you the inconvenience of getting up early and getting the kids ready and coming to church and dropping them in. The checkbox, as we all know, as worship leaders, is not so that the person can walk away and say, I sang. The goal is that they walk away and say, I spent time with my family. I spent time in the presence of the Lord with the people that love me. And there's no question from what we are seeing in younger generations through cell phones that this is not a close second to real community.
Right.
It just is what it is.
I know. I kind of wish we were hanging out in person right now instead of virtually.
Right.
Well, I don't kind of wish. I definitely wish. And that's the weird thing about online services. I think it's such a catch-22 of that it has enabled churches to be able to reach a lot more people that maybe would have never stepped foot in a church. But at the same time, the people who used to step foot in the church now are like more disconnected than ever. Because I think there's a lot of people just not going back because they're watching them online. And I've kind of wondered, like, well, maybe churches just need to, like, what's worse? I don't know. You know, should churches just stop doing online services so that people have to kind of get back in community? Because I think that is an important piece, but...
No, I just think that it's not one or the other. The online community exists to share what is happening in the church, as long as the people who are communicating from the church to the congregation in the online community make it clear to them that the purpose of the online presentation is to give them an alternative to the physical gathering, and that the physical gathering is the primary prescription, again, that God is wanting from us.
Yeah, that's really good. My other question for you is, a lot of churches right now, I think, are also struggling to find volunteers and people to play. I was just at a church that you and I both know down in Naperville, High Point. I was just leading worship there a couple weeks ago, and in the green room, we were just talking, and they were just sharing how it's such a struggle finding band members. And I'm like, I think this is just about every church everywhere. Well. And I would be curious, just from your perspective, what tips do you have for those who are troubled finding people to serve on your worship team?
Firstly and I'm not trying to give like a tricky answer to this, but I think that, like, again, we can often be too consumed with the empty shelves of the bookstore instead of the books that are there, and being thankful for the people who are there and willing to give their time is something that I have found myself. I wouldn't say this unless I was first in line of being guilty of that. We have often just kind of like overlooked those people, searching for new people, when in fact, like, having a good liturgy of how you lead people in worship, I think releases us to have some weeks where we can have a whole band on stage, and then some weeks where we just get up there with an acoustic guitar and we're just kind of like, you know, in my British sarcastic mind, the alternative version of Andy would get up on stage and say, I was just checking that you guys don't need a band to worship God, right? And the whole congregation would be like, yeah. And they would be like, great, let's sing, you know? And so I think, firstly, my word to worship leaders would just be kind of like, know that God is not counting success or significance based on how many people you have serving in your ministry, but on the fact of whether at the end of the day people are going back to their cars thinking God is awesome. And if you can do that with an acoustic guitar, just remember that every song that you're playing was written on one instrument. It doesn't matter how crazy or elaborate you want that band to be. Someone sat in a room with a piano or an acoustic guitar and owns the most precious version of that song in its truest form, maybe. And you are not shortchanging God, who is your only audience at the weekend, by just giving it back to him and his people by delivering it in that truest form. But then, I'm not the worship pastor at a church with just 200 people, and I'm scrambling for that sense of, well, I would like some musicians. And prayer is always going to be the top of the list. It's the thing that God puts his stock in. God puts his stock in prayer. Ask and you shall receive. Pray the people in. And they might need to transition out of a ministry that they're in. They might be moving across the country to your church. But you have to participate in a relationship with and knows who they are. And did I lose you for a second there? I felt like
just for a second, locked up. But we got you back.
But praying those people in is crucial, and I'll say it again, and I'll land the plane here. But just like worship leader, be released from the pressure of bigger is better. Be released from the thinking that I have to have a full band to be able to worship God. But instead, develop a relationship with him in prayer and watch him build your ministry. And you participate in being active in that by seeking people out, but by praying them in. But let him build his church. I will build my church, he says. And are you sure, Lord? Because I feel like you want me to build it. And he's like, no. I will build my church. I just invited you into the process. So talk to me and ask me for what you need. If you need a drummer, let's go find a drummer, And but part of the beautiful thing, Matt, that you have is that if I was in that church we use tracks every weekend for, 50, 60, 70% of the songs. We use tracks with vertical. I'm standing on your shoulders of what you have provided for the church. I'm a first-hand recipient of that, and in a sensitive and careful approach, if I was in a church that lacked some volunteers while I was praying them in, I would utilize the maximum benefits that you guys offer through the systems that you've set up. I think it's beautiful. Yeah. I think because what you've given people is not hey, here's a track, you be a karaoke guy and play along. What you've given people are, here are all the musicians, you pick what you want to use. Right. And let that support your thing. And I think that's just amazing.
I love that word too, that you don't have to feel like you have to have a full band. I do think that worship leaders feel the pressure that they have to sound like the album and that recording, and you don't have to have that. That's way too much pressure.
Yeah, but you've written songs, Matt, and probably some of those voice notes that you have on your phone when that song first got written, and then we're like, okay, let's capture that, and then you play it. That those are some of the sweetest versions of those songs.
Yeah.
And so why would we be cheating the Lord by leading our people in the original version of the song.
Wow. All right, Andy, I have one more question for you. If you were having coffee with a young worship leader or young person who wants to be a worship leader, what's the main, one thing you would want to impart and share with them, from your years and years and years of being a worship pastor?
I think you know the answer to this because I'm a broken record that spins, but
Yep.
But the nail in the middle is always going to be love the people more than the music. And I think I think the enemy's direct conflict against the enemy who's like, no, love the music more than the people. And that's why I know that's the Lord's mission for us. It's love the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Then love your neighbor. And then he finishes the sentence. It's clear that to love people is to love God. And I love music a lot. I've given my life and my career to it. But let us not elevate the vehicle that we so beautifully travel on over the people that we are trying to transport there, and the destination of where we're trying to get to. And so my word to a worship leader is love the people more than the music, but welcome to the battle. Welcome to I think the truest form of a worship leader standing on the front line is not with a guitar around his neck, but it's with a Bible in one hand and a flag in the other. And just ready to run down the hill into the valley and being like, come on, people, let's go. And to do that person needs a lot of influence. And you don't gain influence. I would trade all the authority in the world for a small ounce of influence where people would be like, I feel cared for by that guy. I feel seen by that guy. I feel known by that guy. So that when I step up on stage at the weekend and I'm like, let's run down into the hill. Run down into the valley. Let's take the field for Christ. That it wasn't based on music, but it was based upon that relationship.
Andy, that's so good. Can I ask you one other question that just popped in my head?
Sure.
Because I want to know this. I just want to know this about you, just out of curiosity. Of the question of who is Andi Rozier. If, let's just say, worship leading was not a career, you couldn't work at a church, you can't get paid to lead worship, what would you do?
I would drive Amazon Prime trucks around. I already know the answer to that.
Amazon Prime trucks?
Yeah, I would, because it's the way that I think that firstly, I could listen to podcasts about the Bible and stuff all day long.
And music.
But also, it's strange for the introverted person that I am inside, the thought of just handing someone something that they've been waiting for and the joy that comes when they see a package arriving, like I do every time the Amazon Prime truck pulls up. That
you want to be Santa Claus.
I'm 44 years old, and there's still that part of me that's just like the kid inside. That's like, ooh, what arrived, and just being that guy, just what a sweet job.
I don't know what it is, but the way you said that, for some reason, it gave me goosebumps. And it's a funny thing to get goosebumps over, but that is true. That would be a very special thing.
It would. It really would.
Wow. Yeah. Andi Rozier, Amazon Prime truck driver. Man, it's funny because when I find myself talking to other worship leaders about worship in Loop community and interviews, podcasts, whatever, I find myself saying a lot of things that I'm like, I learned that from Andi Rozier. Even the thing people over the music. I've said that before. There's things that I've said that I'm like, I learned that from Andy, and you just have so much wisdom, man.
We learned it together. That's what we did.
Have you thought about writing a book? I'm sure you've thought about it.
A lot of people have asked me about it, and
you need to.
I don't know, dude. Maybe this is the book. Just these conversations.
Oh, it's so good. I feel like God has just really, really gifted you with wisdom and the way to mentor worship leaders. And I know you're doing that a lot with Vertical Worship Cohort, I think it's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before we go, is there anything you actually want to like say as far as like where can worship leaders find you or music?
Yeah, just my cell number is 847-489-2250. 847-489-2250. That's my cell number. If you want me to pray for you, if you want me to answer a question, I'll answer it. Like we're all on level ground in the kingdom. So, but yeah, I mean, there's vertical, there's harvest, there's all those things.
Andy, thank you so much, man. It's good to see you again.
You're welcome. It's good to see you, brother. Take care of that sweet family of yours.
You too.
Yeah. All right.
See you, man. All right, you guys. That was a I very much enjoyed that conversation with Andy. I've actually missed seeing him, missed talking to him. So much wisdom. And I've seen him I've seen him firsthand pour into the lives of so many worship leaders, people who have come to different conferences at their church and workshops that they teach when they're on tour, and just a lot of really good stuff there. So I would love for you guys down in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're watching this, or if you're listening to a podcast, write down in the comments just what is the one thing that you walked away from this conversation with? What's one thing that stuck out to you? Maybe something you want to implement in your worship ministry or church, or just a little nugget that you're like, I'm going to hold on to that. I'd love to hear from you on that. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Facebook, YouTube, the podcast, and stay tuned for other great conversations with worship pastors. Thanks for joining us today. Bye. This is Matt. Thanks for listening. Hey, let us know what's the main thing you learned from today's talk. Write it down in the comments. Send us a DM. We hope to hear from you soon.